The German Who Saved a Village, Act I. France, 1944. Summer heat lies heavy over the countryside, thick and oppressive, the kind of heat that makes men irritable, that turns tempers short and decisions hasty. The war has been grinding through France for 4 years now, occupation transforming into battleground as Allied forces push inland from Normandy beaches. The front moves daily, sometimes hourly, lines of control shifting like water, leaving civilians trapped between retreating Germans and advancing Americans, caught in the machinery of armies that regard villages as tactical positions, not homes. The village of Saint-Michel-sur-Loire sits 40 kilometers south of Caen, small farming community of perhaps 300 souls, ancient stone houses clustered around medieval church, surrounded by fields that have fed families for generations. The war has touched it lightly until now, occupation bringing restrictions and fear but not violence, German garrison maintaining order without brutality, locals enduring rather than resisting. But August 1944 changes everything. The front approaches, American forces advancing rapidly, German units falling back in disorder, and Saint-Michel finds itself directly in the path of retreat. August 12, 1944. The German garrison withdraws during night, regular Wehrmacht troops marching north toward new defensive positions, leaving the village empty of occupation for first time in 4 years. The villagers celebrate cautiously, understanding liberation is coming, that Americans will arrive soon, that their long ordeal approaches conclusion. They emerge from houses, gather in the square, speak openly for first time in years. Children play without fear. Women plan celebrations. Men discuss what comes next, how to welcome liberators, how to rebuild lives after occupation. But celebration is premature. By mid-afternoon, new German forces arrive, not regular Wehrmacht but SS troops, Waffen-SS Panzer Division retreating from Normandy, battle-hardened fanatics still committed to fighting despite inevitable defeat. They're exhausted, filthy, angry, their division shattered by weeks of combat, their equipment destroyed by Allied air power, their discipline crumbling under pressure of continuous retreat. They regard French civilians with contempt, see collaboration everywhere, blame locals for German losses, look for enemies to punish. The SS commander, Hauptsturmführer Klaus Richter, establishes headquarters in the village square, summons the mayor, demands information about resistance activity. The mayor, elderly man named Henri Durand, insists there is no resistance in Saint-Michel, that villagers have remained neutral, that they want only to survive the war in peace. Richter doesn't believe him. He's seen too much resistance activity, too many ambushes, too many German soldiers killed by partisans. Every French village harbors enemies, he believes. Every civilian is potential threat. His suspicions are partially justified. The village has provided modest support to resistance, nothing dramatic or violent, just information passed quietly, food left where partisans might find it, warnings given when German patrols approached. The kind of small resistance that villagers rationalize as humanitarian rather than military, helping neighbors rather than fighting Germans. But to Richter, any support for resistance equals collaboration, deserving of punishment, requiring response. He interrogates Durand harshly, demands names, locations, details of resistance contacts. Durand has little to offer, knows some things but not everything, protects names instinctively even under pressure. Richter's patience, already thin, evaporates quickly. He orders his troops to search the village, to find evidence of collaboration, to identify collaborators for punishment. The search is brutal, systematic, destructive. Doors kicked in, possessions scattered, families terrified. They find evidence quickly, too quickly, as if they were looking for excuse rather than truth. A radio hidden in basement, used for listening to BBC broadcasts. Ammunition cached in barn, left by resistance fighters months ago. Maps marked with German positions, drawn by teenage boy fascinated by military movements. Each discovery confirms Richter's suspicions, proves in his mind that Saint-Michel is nest of collaborators, enemy village requiring harsh response. By evening, Richter has made his decision. Saint-Michel will be destroyed, buildings burned, civilians executed as warning to other villages, as punishment for resistance collaboration, as demonstration of German power even in retreat. He issues orders to his officers, instructs them to prepare for operation, to assemble villagers in square, to ready incendiary charges for burning buildings. The execution will occur at dawn, the burning will follow, and by noon Saint-Michel will cease to exist. The orders reach Hauptmann Walter Riegels, Wehrmacht officer attached to SS Division for liaison purposes, his regular army unit absorbed into Richter's command during chaotic retreat. Riegels is career soldier, 41 years old, veteran of Poland and Russia, decorated for bravery, respected for competence. But he's also increasingly disillusioned, horrified by SS methods, disgusted by treatment of civilians, questioning orders that violate basic humanity. He's seen too much, experienced too much, lost too many illusions about German righteousness. Riegels reads Richter's orders with growing horror. Destroy entire village. Execute 300 civilians. For what? Minor resistance support, the kind of activity happening in every French village, hardly justifying collective punishment. This isn't military necessity, it's murder, pure and simple, war crime that will accomplish nothing except adding to Germany's long list of atrocities. He can't be part of this, can't follow these orders, can't participate in massacre. But what can he do? He's Wehrmacht officer in SS command structure, his authority limited, his influence minimal. Refusing orders means court-martial, execution for cowardice or insubordination, death that accomplishes nothing because Richter will simply assign another officer to carry out destruction. Appealing to higher authority is impossible, communication lines broken, chain of command fragmented, every unit operating independently in retreat chaos. He's alone with his conscience, facing choice between following criminal orders or disobeying with fatal consequences. He considers his options through the night, sitting in commandeered house while villagers huddle in square under guard, awaiting dawn execution. He could follow orders, participate in massacre, preserve his life by destroying theirs. That's what most officers would do, what military discipline demands, what self-preservation dictates. Or he could refuse, accept death, die with conscience intact but accomplish nothing, save nobody, merely add his life to casualty list without changing outcome for villagers. But there's third option, dangerous and uncertain, requiring courage beyond mere physical bravery. He could falsify reports, could disobey orders while pretending compliance, could release villagers and report them executed, gamble that chaos of retreat prevents verification, that Richter won't discover deception until too late. It's enormous risk, certain death if discovered, but it offers chance to save 300 lives, to prevent massacre, to choose humanity over obedience. The decision crystallizes around midnight, moment of clarity cutting through confusion and fear. He will disobey. He will save the village. He will accept consequences, whatever they may be, because letting massacre proceed is unacceptable, because some orders must be refused, because conscience demands action despite risk. He's been following orders for years, participating in war he increasingly doubts, serving cause he no longer believes in. This is his line, his moment of refusal, his chance to choose right over wrong. He begins planning immediately, working through details, identifying obstacles, developing deception. The execution is scheduled for dawn, 6 hours away, enough time to evacuate villagers if he moves quickly. He'll need to release them quietly, avoid alerting SS guards, provide cover story that withstands initial scrutiny. Then he'll need to create evidence of execution, evidence convincing enough to satisfy Richter temporarily, buy time for villagers to escape, delay discovery until verification becomes impossible. At 3 a.m, he approaches the guard commander, young SS officer named Franz, presents forged orders changing execution timing, claims Richter wants villagers moved to different location for more efficient processing. Franz is suspicious but ultimately compliant, conditioned to follow orders without question, unwilling to challenge superior officer even one from Wehrmacht rather than SS. He assembles guards, prepares to move villagers. Riegels leads them away from square, away from village, into surrounding woods where morning darkness provides cover. Once out of sight of main SS positions, he halts the column, dismisses guards on pretext of security sweep, waits until they're gone. Then he addresses the villagers directly, speaking quickly in rough French, explaining situation, giving instructions. They don't understand immediately, suspect trap, fear this is preliminary to execution in woods rather than village. He repeats his message, more urgently now, time running short. He's releasing them, he says. They must flee immediately, head south away from front lines, avoid roads, travel through forests, put maximum distance between themselves and Saint-Michel before dawn. They have perhaps 3 hours head start before his deception is discovered, before Richter realizes they're gone, before pursuit begins. Slowly, understanding dawns. This German officer is saving them, defying his own command, risking his life for theirs. They begin moving, families gathering children, elderly helped by young, the whole village streaming into forest and darkness, guided by local knowledge of paths and landmarks. Durand, the mayor, approaches Riegels, tries to thank him, to express gratitude for mercy shown. Riegels waves him off impatiently. Save thanks for later, he says. Right now, run. Get your people away before Richter discovers what happened. The villagers disappear into darkness, 300 souls fleeing through forest, heading south toward Allied lines, toward safety, toward survival they shouldn't have. Riegels watches them go, understanding he's just signed his death warrant, that discovery is inevitable, that execution awaits. But he feels strange peace, satisfaction deeper than fear, knowledge that for once he chose correctly, acted according to conscience rather than orders, saved lives instead of destroying them. He returns to village alone, begins creating evidence of massacre. He fires weapons into empty buildings, creating bullet holes consistent with execution. He sets small fires, producing smoke and destruction suggesting larger burning. He writes false report describing successful operation, 300 collaborators executed, village partially destroyed as warning, mission accomplished per Richter's orders. The deception won't withstand close inspection, but it doesn't need to. It only needs to delay discovery few hours, give villagers time to escape beyond retrieval, create confusion sufficient to prevent immediate pursuit. Dawn comes, gray light revealing empty village, smoke rising from buildings, evidence of violence everywhere. Riegel submits his report to Richter, describes successful execution, requests permission to rejoin main column. Richter accepts report initially, focused on other problems, dealing with continuing retreat, coordinating with other units. He files Riegel's report, moves on to next crisis, doesn't verify immediately. But by mid-morning, inconsistencies emerge. Other officers report no sounds of mass execution, no evidence of 300 bodies, suspicious absence of expected aftermath. Richter orders investigation, sends troops to verify Riegel's report, discover truth. They find empty village, evidence of deception, signs of evacuation rather than execution. The villagers are gone, released deliberately, orders disobeyed, mission falsified. Richter's rage is absolute, terrible, the fury of commander whose authority was defied, whose orders were ignored, whose power was challenged by subordinate. He summons Riegels immediately, demands explanation, receives only silence. Riegels offers no defense, no justification, no appeal. He disobeyed orders, he releases villagers, he accepts responsibility and consequences. Nothing more to say. Court-martial proceeds immediately, summary military justice administered in field conditions. Riegels is found guilty of disobeying orders in wartime, of releasing enemy collaborators, of falsifying combat reports. The sentence is death, execution by firing squad, to be carried out immediately as example to other officers who might consider similar disobedience. Richter personally approves sentence, orders execution for noon, selects firing squad from his most reliable troops. Riegels spends his last hours in makeshift cell, former wine cellar converted to prison, writing letter to his wife, explaining his choice, describing why he disobeyed, accepting death as price of conscience. He doesn't regret his decision, doesn't wish he'd chosen differently, doesn't mourn approaching end. 300 people are alive because of what he did, 300 futures preserved, that's worth his life, worth any price. At noon, they bring him to execution site, village square where villagers were supposed to die, where his disobedience prevented massacre. The irony isn't lost on him. He'll die in place of those he saved, his life traded for theirs, equation he accepts willingly. The firing squad assembles, young SS soldiers following orders, shooting man who refused to shoot civilians, military logic turned inside out. Richter offers final chance to speak, opportunity for last words. Riegels considers, decides against political statement or moral lecture. Instead, he says simply, in German that carries across square, I did what I had to do. Nothing more. Then silence, acceptance, readiness. The firing squad executes orders efficiently, bullets striking precisely, death instantaneous. Walter Riegels falls in Saint-Michel-sur-Loire Square, 41 years old, Wehrmacht officer who chose conscience over obedience, humanity over duty, death over murder. His body is left where it fell, warning to other potential disobedient officers, demonstration of consequences for refusing orders. The German who saved a village, Act 2. The villagers of Saint-Michel move through the forest like ghosts, 300 souls flowing between trees in pre-dawn darkness, their passage marked only by whispered warnings and the soft crunch of leaves underfoot. They move south, always south, away from the German lines, away from Richter and his SS troops, away from the death that waited for them in the village square. The forest provides cover but also danger, every sound potentially hostile, every shadow potentially enemy. They travel in family groups, parents carrying children, young men supporting elderly, the whole community bound together by shared terror and impossible salvation. Durand, the mayor, walks near the front of the column, his mind still struggling to process what happened, the German officer who released them, who defied his own commanders, who chose their lives over his orders. It makes no sense within the logic of occupation, within the 4 years of German control, within everything Durand has learned about how occupiers think and act. Germans follow orders, maintain discipline, prioritize military necessity over individual mercy. Yet Riegels did the opposite, violated every principle of military obedience, saved people he had no reason to save. The question haunts Durand as they move deeper into forest, why? What motivated Riegels to such extraordinary disobedience, such conscious self-sacrifice? Not friendship, they'd never met before tonight. Not strategic advantage, releasing French civilians provides no military benefit to Germany. Not personal gain, disobeying orders guarantees punishment not reward. The only explanation is moral choice, conscience asserting itself against orders, humanity overriding military duty. But that explanation seems inadequate somehow, too simple for decision carrying death sentence. By dawn, they've covered perhaps 10 kilometers, enough distance to feel temporarily safe, far enough that immediate pursuit seems unlikely. Durand calls halt, allows people to rest, assess their situation. They're refugees now, displaced from homes, separated from possessions, dependent on whatever they carried during evacuation. Some have nothing, fled in nightclothes with bare essentials. Others manage to grab supplies, food and blankets and tools. They inventory resources collectively, discovering they have perhaps 3 days of food if carefully rationed, minimal medical supplies, no clear plan beyond continuing south toward Allied lines. A young woman named Marie approaches Durand, her face pale with exhaustion and shock. She asks the question everyone is thinking, what happens to the German officer, to Riegels, when his deception is discovered? Durand has no comforting answer. Discovery is certain, probably already occurred. Punishment will be severe, likely execution, military justice administered swiftly to officer who disobeyed orders. Riegels saved them knowing this consequence, accepting death as price of their survival. The knowledge weighs heavily, 300 lives purchased with one, mathematics that seems simultaneously generous and terrible. They continue moving through morning, following game trails and logging roads, avoiding main routes where German patrols might travel. The forest is ancient, thick with oak and beech, canopy blocking sunlight, creating perpetual twilight beneath trees. It's disorienting, difficult to maintain direction, easy to circle back unknowingly. But local hunters in the group know these woods, recognize landmarks, guide the column steadily southward. They estimate another day's travel will bring them close to American positions, close to safety, close to genuine liberation rather than temporary reprieve. By midday, they hear sounds behind them, distant but unmistakable, vehicles on roads, shouted commands, organized movement. Pursuit. Richter has discovered the deception, deployed forces to recapture escaped villagers, determined to complete his original mission despite Riegels' interference. The villagers increase pace, abandon caution for speed, crash through undergrowth rather than moving carefully. 300 people make noise impossible to hide, leave trail easy to follow. Their only advantage is distance, the head start Riegels provided, the hours purchased with his disobedience. German search parties are systematic, professional, experienced in hunting partisans through French forests. They have vehicles for road movement, radios for coordination, dogs for tracking. The SS troops are motivated by anger now, fury at being defied, determination to punish escaped villagers and validate Richter's authority. They spread out in search pattern, sweep through forest methodically, close the distance steadily. The mathematics of pursuit favor them. 300 refugees including elderly and children cannot outpace trained soldiers traveling light and moving fast. By mid-afternoon, the first shots ring out, German patrol encountering rear elements of the refugee column. The villagers scatter, abandoning cohesion for individual survival, families fleeing in different directions. The forest becomes chaos, people running blindly, children crying, shots echoing through trees. Some villagers are captured immediately, overtaken by faster-moving German troops. Others escape temporarily, hide in thick undergrowth, hold breath while patrols pass nearby. Durand finds himself separated from main group, traveling with perhaps 20 villagers including Marie and her family. They move west rather than south, angling away from heaviest pursuit, gambling that flanking movement provides better escape chance than direct flight. The strategy works initially, they avoid German patrols, put distance between themselves and pursuit. But they're also moving away from American lines, heading parallel to front rather than toward it, delaying rather than achieving salvation. As evening approaches, they rest in small clearing, hidden by dense thicket, trying to assess situation. They've lost contact with main refugee group, have no idea how many villagers were captured, how many remain free, whether anyone reached American lines. They have minimal supplies, no clear plan, diminishing options. Continuing movement in darkness risks discovery, making noise or stumbling into patrols. But remaining stationary allows pursuit to catch up, search pattern to contract around them. Marie's father, a farmer named Paul, suggests surrender. They're exhausted, frightened, unable to continue running indefinitely. Perhaps surrender brings mercy, perhaps Richter will accept recapture rather than demanding execution, perhaps they can survive as prisoners rather than dying as fugitives. The logic is understandable, born of exhaustion and fear, human desire to end uncertainty even at cost of freedom. But Durand rejects surrender emphatically. Riegels gave them chance to live, sacrificed himself to provide that chance. Surrendering now negates his sacrifice, makes his death meaningless, wastes opportunity purchased at such terrible cost. They owe it to Riegels to keep trying, to fight for survival he died to provide, to honor his choice by refusing to quit. As long as they remain free, his sacrifice retains meaning. Surrendering destroys that meaning, reduces his death to futile gesture. The argument is compelling, Marie and others agree to continue. They rest through evening, conserve strength, prepare for night movement. Durand plans route carefully, studying maps borrowed from hunters in group, identifying path that avoids roads and German positions while gradually working toward American lines. It will take several days, require traveling at night and hiding during day, demand endurance and discipline. But it's possible, barely, their only real option beyond surrender or death. Night falls, they begin moving, traveling slowly through darkness, feeling their way carefully, avoiding noise. The forest at night is different creature entirely, familiar landmarks invisible, sounds amplified and distorted, every noise potentially threatening. They move in single file, each person maintaining contact with person ahead, the column linked by touch rather than sight. Progress is measured in meters rather than kilometers, painfully slow but steady. Around midnight, they hear something ahead, voices speaking English, American accents clear and unmistakable. They've reached Allied lines, stumbled into American patrol, found salvation almost accidentally. Relief is overwhelming, people weeping quietly, embracing, offering silent prayers. They approach carefully, hands raised, calling out in French and broken English, identifying themselves as refugees, as civilians fleeing Germans, as people needing help. The American soldiers are young paratroopers, part of unit holding positions south of German retreat route. They're suspicious initially, concerned about infiltrators or deception, but quickly accept the refugees as genuine. They provide food, water, medical attention, arrange transport back to rear areas. The soldiers are curious about the refugees' story, how entire village escaped German control, why they're fleeing through forest at night. Durand tells them about Riegels, the German officer who released them, who disobeyed orders to save their lives, who accepted death as price of their freedom. The American soldiers listen with expressions mixing disbelief and respect, struggling to reconcile story of merciful German officer with their experience of enemy brutality. One soldier, a sergeant named Williams, asks if Durand knows what happened to Riegels, whether he survived his disobedience. Durand has no certain knowledge, only logical deduction. Richter would have discovered deception within hours, would have summoned Riegels, would have administered immediate military justice. Court-martial, death sentence, execution probably same day. That's how SS operates, swift brutal punishment for disobedience, example set for others who might consider similar defiance. Riegels knew this outcome, accepted it consciously, chose their lives over his own. The certainty in Durand's voice silences questions, soldiers processing idea of enemy officer sacrificing himself for French civilians. Williams promises to report Riegels' action through intelligence channels, ensure Allied command knows about German officer who saved village, who proved that humanity persists even within military machine designed to crush it. The promise provides small comfort to Durand, acknowledgement that Riegels' choice won't be forgotten, that his death carries meaning beyond immediate circumstances. But it feels inadequate somehow, insufficient recognition for sacrifice of such magnitude. Over following days, more Saint Michel villagers reach American lines, arriving in small groups, telling similar stories of flight and pursuit, of narrow escapes and desperate hiding. The intelligence officers piece together complete picture, approximately 240 villagers escaped successfully, reached Allied safety, survived Richter's planned massacre. 60 were recaptured or killed during pursuit, tragic loss but still minority, majority saved by Riegels' intervention. The recaptured villagers tell darker story, Richter's fury at discovering deception, his determination to punish someone for embarrassment of losing escaped civilians. Without Riegels to execute again, he turned rage on recaptured villagers, ordered harsh treatment, threatened execution as original plan demanded. But even Richter couldn't sustain massacre mentality indefinitely, his SS unit was in full retreat, Allied forces advancing rapidly, time and opportunity for vengeance diminishing. The recaptured villagers were imprisoned temporarily, then released during final German withdrawal, surviving ultimately through Richter's distraction rather than mercy. American intelligence begins investigating Riegels' fate, interviewing recaptured villagers who witnessed aftermath, gathering information from French resistance contacts who monitored German activities. The story emerges gradually, confirmed through multiple sources, assembled into coherent narrative. Richter court-martialed Riegels immediately upon discovering deception, sentence delivered and executed within hours, firing squad assembled in Saint Michel Square, death instantaneous. Riegels offered no defense, accepted responsibility completely, died with dignity that even SS executioners grudgingly acknowledged. His body was left in square as warning, visible demonstration of consequences for disobeying orders. But Wehrmacht soldiers retrieved it after SS withdrawal, buried him properly in village cemetery, marked grave with simple wooden cross. They respected Riegels as officer and comrade even while disagreeing with his choice, honored him according to military tradition despite his execution for disobedience. The grave remains, tended by Wehrmacht soldiers until their own withdrawal, then abandoned to elements and time. The intelligence report reaches higher command, circulates through Allied headquarters, attracts attention of officers interested in documenting both German atrocities and exceptional acts contrary to expected enemy behavior. Riegels becomes unusual case, German officer whose disobedience saved civilians, whose moral choice contradicted military duty, whose death represented both criminal punishment and heroic sacrifice depending on perspective adopted. Some Allied officers dismiss story as propaganda or exaggeration, unwilling to credit German officer with genuine mercy, suspicious of narrative that humanizes enemy. Others recognize its authenticity precisely because it contradicts propaganda, because it acknowledges complexity rather than maintaining convenient simplification of absolute German evil. War produces moral choices constantly, some people choose correctly regardless of uniform or nationality, humanity occasionally trumps military logic even within armies designed to suppress individual conscience. Durand, settled in temporary refugee camp near American headquarters, struggles with survivor's guilt familiar to everyone who lives while others die. 240 villagers survived, 60 lost, 1 German officer executed. The mathematics seem wrong somehow, disproportionate, unfair. Why should Riegels die so they could live? What made their lives worth his sacrifice? The questions have no satisfactory answers, only acceptance that survival is gift requiring acknowledgement not justification. Marie visits Durand regularly, brings food and conversation, helps him process trauma and guilt. She shares her own struggle with survivor's guilt, her awareness that recaptured villagers included friends and family, that random chance determined who escaped and who didn't. But she also insists on gratitude over guilt, on honoring Riegels' sacrifice through living well rather than drowning in remorse. He chose to save them, she argues, his death was gift not burden, accepting that gift means living fully not suffering pointlessly. The conversation helps Durand gradually, shifting his perspective from guilt toward gratitude, from questioning why toward accepting that. He begins planning return to Saint Michel once Allied forces secure area, thinking about rebuilding village, about memorializing Riegels properly, about ensuring future generations know story of German officer who saved their ancestors. The planning provides purpose, transforms passive survival into active remembrance, gives meaning to continued existence. August fades into September, Allied forces advance rapidly, German resistance collapses, liberation of France accelerates toward completion. Saint Michel falls under Allied control in early September, American troops securing village without resistance, finding it largely intact despite Richter's planned destruction. The Wehrmacht soldiers who buried Riegels left records in church, simple notation in parish register identifying grave location and circumstances of death. The Americans relay this information to refugee camps, inform surviving villagers that their homes await and their savior rests in village cemetery. Durand returns to Saint Michel in mid-September, leads group of survivors back to village, begins process of reclaiming homes and rebuilding lives. They find Riegels' grave immediately, simple wooden cross marking plot in corner of cemetery, inscription carved roughly, Hauptmann Walter Riegels, Wehrmacht, died August 13, 1944. No mention of execution, no explanation of circumstances, just name and date, military simplicity that conceals extraordinary story. The villagers gather at grave spontaneously, impromptu memorial for man they barely knew but owe everything to. Durand speaks briefly, describes Riegels' choice, his deliberate disobedience, his conscious acceptance of death to provide their survival. Others add their testimonies, personal accounts of that night, memories of German officer who defied logic and expectation by choosing mercy over orders. The memorial is simple but profound, acknowledgement of debt that can never be fully repaid, gratitude that transcends nationality and circumstances. They decide collectively to maintain grave permanently, to replace wooden cross with stone marker, to ensure Riegels' story is preserved and transmitted to future generations. Marie suggests adding inscription, something beyond name and date, words capturing essence of his choice. After discussion, they agree on simple phrase, 5 words in German and French: hier war ein Mensch, here was a man. Not hero, not saint, not martyr, just man, human being who acted according to conscience when circumstances demanded choice between right and wrong. The stone marker is installed in October, simple granite monument replacing temporary cross, inscription carved deeply, designed to last generations. The villagers' established tradition of maintaining grave perpetually, rotating responsibility among families, ensuring flowers are always present, plot always tended. It becomes sacred space not through religious significance but through moral weight, reminder that individual choice matters, that one person can make difference, that conscience sometimes demands disobedience. The German Who Saved a Village, Act 3. Winter 1944 approaches, cold descending over Saint-Michel-sur-Loire, frost covering the fields that villagers are trying to restore to productivity. The war continues eastward, Allied forces pushing into Germany itself, but for Saint-Michel the immediate conflict has passed, leaving behind damaged buildings, traumatized people, and one grave that represents everything complex and contradictory about human nature during wartime. The village slowly returns to life, families reoccupying homes, children returning to school, farmers preparing fields for spring planting. But normalcy feels fragile, temporary, haunted by memory of how close they came to annihilation. Durand, as mayor, works to restore village administration, coordinates reconstruction efforts, manages relationships with American occupation authorities. The work is overwhelming, endless bureaucratic tasks compounding with physical labor of rebuilding. But he also takes on additional responsibility, self-appointed keeper of Riegels' story, determined that the German officer's sacrifice not be forgotten or diminished with time. He writes detailed account of events, records testimonies from villagers, documents everything that happened that August night when one man's choice saved 300 lives. The account attracts attention beyond Saint-Michel. French resistance networks hear the story, initially skeptical of narrative praising German officer, suspicious of collaboration or propaganda. But investigation confirms details, multiple independent sources verify Riegels' actions, evidence overwhelms skepticism. The story is genuine, extraordinary not because it's invented but because it's true. A Wehrmacht officer did defy SS commander, did release condemned villagers, did accept execution as consequence of moral choice. American military intelligence continues investigating Riegels' background, trying to understand what produced such extraordinary disobedience, what in his history predicted his final choice. They discover he was career soldier, enlisted in 1922, served through Weimar Republic and Third Reich's rise, fought in Poland and Russia, received Iron Cross for bravery at Stalingrad. Standard military career, nothing suggesting propensity for dramatic moral gesture, no history of disobedience or resistance to orders. But letters found in his personal effects, forwarded by Wehrmacht unit to American authorities, reveal internal struggle, progressive disillusionment with Nazi regime, growing horror at atrocities witnessed on Eastern Front. He wrote to his wife Elizabeth regularly, letters mixing mundane domestic details with veiled criticism of SS methods, oblique references to actions that troubled his conscience. The letters couldn't be explicit, military censorship prevented direct criticism, but reading between lines reveals man increasingly disgusted by war he was fighting, questioning cause he once believed just. One letter, written in July 1944 just weeks before Saint-Michel, contains passage particularly revealing, I wonder sometimes what we are becoming, what this war is making of us. We started believing we fought for something noble, for Germany's future, for European order. But what I see now is just destruction, just cruelty without purpose, just suffering we inflict because we can. When does a soldier's duty end and a man's conscience begin? Where is the line between following orders and losing one's soul? The question proved prophetic. Riegels found his line in Saint-Michel, discovered boundary he couldn't cross, identified order he couldn't follow. The decision didn't come from nowhere, wasn't spontaneous moral impulse, but represented culmination of years of accumulating doubt, progressive erosion of faith in military authority, final recognition that obedience without conscience leads to atrocity. Saint-Michel was his answer to his own question, his choice of conscience over duty, his acceptance that preserving soul matters more than preserving life. Elizabeth Riegels, his widow, receives notification of his death in October 1944, official Wehrmacht telegram reporting he was killed in action during French campaign, no details provided, standard military euphemism for death in service. She doesn't learn true circumstances until February 1945, when American authorities contact her through neutral channels, provide complete account of his actions at Saint Michel, explain he was executed for disobeying orders to massacre civilians. Her reaction is complex, mixing grief with pride, devastation with vindication. She grieves losing husband, mourns future they won't share, suffers normal agony of wartime widowhood. But she also feels strange pride, satisfaction that he died according to conscience rather than orders, that his final act validated years of private doubt, that he chose correctly when circumstances forced choice. The execution transforms from military disgrace to moral triumph, death becoming validation rather than punishment from perspective that values conscience over obedience. She writes to Durand in March 1945, letter finding its way through chaotic postal networks of collapsing Germany, reaching Saint Michel in April. The letter is brief, formal, written in careful French she learned in school decades ago. She thanks villagers for maintaining her husband's grave, expresses gratitude that his sacrifice saved lives, requests they continue remembering him kindly. But beneath formality lies deeper emotion. Widows need to know death had meaning, that suffering produces something beyond more suffering, that sacrifice achieves purpose justifying its cost. Durand responds immediately, writes long letter describing village's gratitude, explaining memorial traditions established, promising permanent maintenance of grave and preservation of story. He includes testimonies from villagers Riegels saved, accounts of lives lived because of his choice, children born who wouldn't exist without his intervention. The letter attempts to quantify unquantifiable, to measure infinite value of preserved lives, to demonstrate mathematically that one death saving 300 represents bargain universe should accept. But he also acknowledges inadequacy of mathematics, admits no calculation truly captures what Riegels gave them, no equation balances loss against gain in morally satisfying way. Instead, Durand writes, they remember him as man who chose correctly in impossible situation, who demonstrated humanity persists even within military machine designed to crush it, who proved individual conscience can override institutional authority when circumstances demand moral choice. That remembrance, imperfect as it is, represents their attempt to honor sacrifice they can never adequately repay. The correspondence between Elizabeth and Saint Michel continues sporadically through 1945 and beyond, letters crossing borders slowly, delayed by war's chaos then by occupation's restrictions. Elizabeth never visits France, circumstances and health preventing travel, but she maintains connection through letters, receiving updates about village reconstruction, learning how community memorializes her husband, understanding his death's meaning extends beyond immediate circumstances. May 1945 brings war's end in Europe, Germany's surrender, Allied victory complete. For Saint Michel, victory is abstract, distant from their immediate concerns of survival and reconstruction. They lost 60 villagers during pursuit after escape, casualties of Richter's fury and random violence of military operations. Those losses hurt deeply, personal tragedies compounding collective trauma. But 240 survived who shouldn't have, lived because one German officer refused unconscionable order, chose conscience despite fatal consequences. The village establishes annual memorial ceremony on August 13, anniversary of Riegels' execution, community gathering at his grave to remember and reflect. The first ceremony, August 1945, draws everyone, entire village processing to cemetery, standing silently around grave marked with new stone inscription. Durand speaks briefly, recounts events of that night, reminds everyone of choice Riegels made and price he paid. Then silence, several minutes of collective quiet, 300 people standing in French cemetery remembering German officer who saved them. The ceremony becomes tradition, repeated annually, attendance mandatory by unspoken agreement, passed to next generation as sacred obligation. Children born after war learn Riegels' story, understand their existence traces to his choice, recognize that shaped their families' histories. The story enters village identity, becomes defining narrative, transforms Saint Michel from anonymous farming community into place where extraordinary moral choice occurred. Years pass, decades, the war recedes into history, participants age and die, direct memory fades to recorded testimony. Durand dies in 1968, having spent 23 years maintaining Riegels' memory, writing and rewriting account of that August night, ensuring documentation survives him. Marie takes over responsibility, continues memorial traditions, guards against forgetting or revision. She lives until 1989, 44 years beyond night she should have died, her entire adult life gift from German officers she knew for minutes. The grave remains, stone marker weathering slowly, inscription still legible, plot always maintained. Successive generations of villagers honor commitment their grandparents made, tend grave perpetually, replace flowers regularly, prevent neglect or vandalism. It becomes pilgrimage site gradually, people from other villages visiting, historians documenting, journalists writing stories. Riegels transforms from individual to symbol, his choice representing all choices for conscience over authority, his death demonstrating cost of moral courage. But Saint Michel resists excessive symbolism, insists on remembering Riegels as man not metaphor, human being who faced impossible choice and chose correctly, officer who retained conscience despite military conditioning designed to suppress it. The inscription they chose, Hier war ein Mensch, reflects this insistence, defines him through humanity not heroism, acknowledges he was person first, soldier second, man capable of choice when institutions demanded obedience. Elizabeth dies in 1972, never having visited France, never seeing grave her husband occupies, knowing him only through letters and memories and second-hand accounts from villagers he saved. But she maintained correspondence with Saint Michel until her death, received annual reports about memorial ceremonies, understood her husband's sacrifice created community of remembrance linking German widow and French village in shared recognition of moral complexity. Her children, Riegels' son and daughter, visit Saint Michel in 1975, 30 years after war's end, seeking connection to father they barely remember, understanding man whose choice shaped their identities. The village receives them warmly, German visitors welcomed rather than resented, recognized as family of their savior rather than children of enemy. The visit is emotional, complicated, mixing grief with pride, loss with gratitude, German shame with French appreciation. The son, Klaus Riegels, speaks at annual memorial ceremony, struggles to articulate what his father's choice means to him personally. He never really knew his father, the man left for war when Klaus was 6, died when he was 8, exists mostly as photographs and his mother's stories and growing legend in French village. But he understands his father's final act defines family legacy, provides moral counterweight to Germany's overwhelming guilt, demonstrates one German at least chose correctly when circumstances demanded choice. Klaus reads from his father's letters, passages revealing progressive disillusionment, mounting horror at what war was becoming, search for line beyond which conscience forbade crossing. The audience listens intently, villagers hearing Riegels' own words for first time, understanding his Saint Michel choice emerged from longer struggle, represented culmination not impulse. The letters humanize him further, transform from remote savior to complex person wrestling with impossible contradictions, soldier caught between duty and morality, man seeking path through moral wilderness of total war. The 1980s bring renewed interest in World War II moral questions, historians examining choices individuals made within totalitarian systems, analyzing how ordinary people responded to extraordinary pressures. Riegels becomes case study, example of successful resistance within military hierarchy, demonstration that disobedience was possible even for officers conditioned toward obedience. Academic papers analyze his choice, compare it to other cases of military disobedience, attempt to identify factors enabling moral courage under circumstances designed to prevent it. But Saint Michel resists academic abstraction, insists Riegels' story belongs to them, to villagers he saved and descendants who inherited that salvation. They cooperate with researchers but maintain ownership of narrative, prevent story from becoming merely academic exercise divorced from human reality. Their annual ceremonies continue, attendance never declining, commitment never wavering, memory actively preserved not passively recorded. The Berlin Wall falls in 1989, Cold War ends, Germany reunifies, Europe transforms into something unrecognizable from 1944's perspective. Saint Michel watches these changes with interest but doesn't alter its relationship to Riegels' memory. Historical context shifts, political meanings evolve, but Village's gratitude remains constant, debt acknowledged regardless of changing circumstances. The grave is maintained, memorial ceremonies continue, story is told to each generation. The 21st century brings new technologies, digital documentation, video recordings of survivors' testimonies, online archives preserving everything knowable about that August night. Saint Michel embraces these tools, uses them to extend Riegels' story beyond village boundaries, makes documentation accessible globally. But technology supplements rather than replaces traditional remembrance, annual cemetery gathering remains central, physical presence at graves still mandatory, human connection still privileged over digital mediation. The last survivor who personally knew Riegels, who heard him speak that night in Forest, who received orders to flee from his own voice, dies in 2008 at age 86. Her death marks transition from living memory to recorded history, from direct testimony to inherited narrative. Saint Michel marks the passage with special memorial ceremony, acknowledging that henceforth Riegels exists only through documentation and tradition, no longer through anyone's personal recollection. But the commitment continues, third and fourth generation villagers maintaining grave, conducting ceremonies, telling story to children who never knew anyone who met Riegels. The memory sustains not through direct connection but through communal dedication, through collective decision that this story matters, that this man's choice deserves perpetual recognition, that their existence depends on remembering accurately and completely. In 2019, 75 years after Riegels' death, Saint Michel hosts largest memorial ceremony ever conducted, inviting German and French officials, military representatives, historians, journalists, descendants of all involved parties. Klaus Riegels, now elderly himself, returns for ceremony, accompanied by his own children and grandchildren, family spanning 4 generations since that August night. The ceremony is formal but emotional, speeches by dignitaries mixing with testimonies from villagers, German officials acknowledging complexity of their history, French representatives expressing gratitude for individual conscience that transcended national conflict. But the most powerful moment comes when Klaus's grandson, 16 years old, reads his great-grandfather's final letter to Elizabeth, written hours before execution, words accepting death as necessary price of moral choice. I could not follow that order, the letter reads. I could not participate in murder of innocent people, could not destroy village for crimes they did not commit, could not execute children for politics beyond their control. I knew refusing meant death. I accept that consequence. Better to die with conscience intact than live having participated in massacre. Tell our children their father chose correctly. That's all that matters. That I chose correctly when circumstances forced choice. The words echo across cemetery, across decades, across transformation of Europe from war-torn continent to peaceful union. They speak to eternal question of individual versus authority, conscience versus obedience, humanity versus military necessity. Riegels answered that question definitively, paid ultimate price for his answer, and in doing so created legacy extending far beyond immediate circumstances. The ceremony ends with silence, hundreds of people standing in cemetery where German officer rests among French villagers, his grave maintained perpetually by community he saved, his choice remembered by generations who inherited life from his death. The stone marker remains, simple and direct, here war ein Mensch, here was a man. Not hero, not saint, not symbol, just man. Human being who faced impossible choice in impossible circumstances and chose conscience over orders, humanity over obedience, death over participation in atrocity. His choice saved 300 lives that night, influenced countless more across decades, demonstrated that individual moral courage matters even when institutions demand compliance, that one person choosing correctly creates ripples extending far beyond immediate act. Saint Michel-sur-Loire continues its existence, small farming village in French countryside, unremarkable except for one extraordinary story, one German grave among French dead, one memorial tradition spanning generations. The village thrives, population stable, economy modest but sustainable, life proceeding normally except for annual August ceremony when community gathers to remember man they owe everything to. The debt can never be fully repaid, gratitude never adequately expressed, loss never truly balanced against gain. But Saint Michel continues trying, maintains the grave, tells the story, ensures memory survives, passes obligation to each new generation. It's imperfect remembrance of imperfect man who made perfect choice when circumstances demanded it. That remembrance, sustained across decades through collective will and communal dedication, represents their answer to Riegels' sacrifice. They remember. They honor. They continue living lives he died to preserve. That's all they can do. That's everything they must do. The sea of forgetting shall not have him. Not while Saint Michel remembers. Not while conscience matters. Not while humanity persists.